Thank you for having me. One virtue of this speaking I've been doing lately is I discovered that my current condition is not nearly as despairing as I thought. I was under the impression I was unemployed, but alas, it turns out I'm an independent scholar. So I'm very gratified by that fact, though I suspect my late mother would have asked the proverbial question, how much? I would have had to give the usual answer, not very. Well, thank you for having me. I've been told there's a rumor I was here once before. I can't quite recall it, but if you asked me where I was yesterday, I couldn't tell you either. The topic I want to speak about this afternoon is one that's been more and more striking to me as I've been reading about, studying the Israel-Palestine conflict, now going on a quarter of a century. And that is, when you look at the actual record, the written record of the Israel-Palestine conflict, the past, which basically means the historical record, the present, which basically means the human rights record, and the future, which basically means the legal diplomatic record for resolving the conflict. When you look at the actual record, the Israel-Palestine conflict is remarkably uncomplicated, remarkably uncontroversial, remarkably uncontentious. And yet, when you enter the arena of public debate, public media, a controversy swirls around this conflict. And in fact, I myself am often designated controversial. And the question I want to look at this evening is, or this afternoon, is how do you account for the fact that a conflict, when you look at the actual written record, being remarkably uncontroversial, how do you account for the fact that when it enters the realm of public debate and discussion, it suddenly becomes vehemently controversial? And the argument I'm going to make this afternoon is that most of the controversy that swirls around the Israel-Palestine conflict is contrived. It's fabricated. It's artificial. Or to put it a little more crudely, it's fake. And the purpose of this artificial, contrived controversy is to deflect attention from and sow confusion about that remarkably uncontroversial documentary record. That's obviously a provocative claim, and I want to begin with a simple illustration. So most of you in this room are familiar with this phenomenon called the peace process, which has had a longer run, I think, than the daytime soap opera As the World Turns. And a subset of this phenomenon called the peace process is what's called the final status issues. How many of you have heard that term, the final status issues? I could see your hands relatively. I see only a couple of hands up. Okay, I see one person with two hands up trying to compensate for everybody else's ignorance. Okay. Well, the final status issues usually refers to those aspects of the Israel-Palestine conflict which are said to be so controversial, so contentious, that they have to be put off to the last stage of negotiations. Otherwise, if you begin with those issues, it's alleged, the negotiations will just break down abruptly. And so you need another term of this phenomenon called the peace process. You need confidence-building measures. And then when everybody has, sat around the room and chanted Om and then saying kumbaya, and we've got mutual confidence, then we can go on to those final status issues. And they generally are considered to be four. One, borders. What are the proper borders of the Israeli state? What are the proper borders of a future Palestinian state? Two, the settlements and settlers, the 460,000 Jewish settlers in the occupied territories. Three, the question of Jerusalem, to whom does it belong? And four, the question of the refugees. Now, in July 2004, the highest judicial body in the world, the International Court of Justice, was asked by the General Assembly of the United Nations to render what's called an advisory opinion on the legality of the wall that Israel has been building in the occupied territories. Some of you might recall the opinion that was rendered, namely that the wall was illegal, had to be dismantled, and Israel had to pay compensation for the damages wrought. In my opinion, that was actually the least significant aspect of the International Court opinion. The more significant aspect is this. Before the court could render an opinion on the legality of the wall, as it happens, you can say by coincidence, it had to first render a legal opinion on three of the four final status issues, the allegedly controversial issues. So I would appreciate if you don't do that, because I'm just telling you from my angle it looks like a gun. I know it's not, but I would appreciate it. Thank you. So they had to render an opinion on three of the four final status issues for reasons which would be obvious to everybody in this room. If, for example, Israel's legitimate border extended into the West Bank, then the wall being built would not raise any legal issue. It would be within Israeli territory, and obviously any state is allowed to erect any structure within its sovereign territory. Similarly, as it happens, the wall takes what the International Court of Justice called a sinuous route winding around the Israeli settlements.